This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Love this podcast? Support this show through the Acast supporter feature. It's up to you how much you give, and there's no regular commitment. Just hit the link in the show description to support now.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states or situations.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
Welcome back to Two Judgy Girls. I'm Mary from the Bay.
And I'm Courtney from LA. TJG is the podcast where we spill all the tea on your favorite reality TV shows, celebrity gossip, and everything in between. We're here to bring you our unfiltered opinions, hilarious commentary, and plenty of laughs along the way.
We're two SDSU Delta Gamma sisters with a microphone and a whole lot of opinions. Each week, we dive headfirst into the wild world of reality television, from Bravo to all the trash TV you could want. We break down the drama, dissect the latest scandals, and share our thoughts on everything from the jaw-dropping moments to the embarrassing antics.
But that's not all. We're not here to just gossip. We're here to connect with you, the jurors, and share our love of all things pop culture. Whether we're dishing on the latest celebrity breakups, discussing our favorite guilty pleasure movies, or sharing embarrassing stories from our own lives, we promise to keep it real, keep it fun, and keep you coming back for more.
Come judge with us.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.
This is Writers on Film, the only podcast dedicated to books on cinema. Hello everybody, my name's John Bleasdale, I'm a writer and film critic, and today I'm going to be talking to the screenwriter of a new film on the Unabomber called Ted K. The screenwriter's name is John Rosenthal, and it's a little bit of a departure for us because I think this might be the first time we've had a screenwriter as a guest. Hopefully you'll enjoy it. By the way, apologies if either this episode or the one prior to this is a little bit shakily edited, but I'm still recovering from COVID, as you might be able to hear from the one side effect that I quite like about COVID is it gives you a little bit of a deeper voice. Not exactly Tom Waits, but going there. So that's all good. If you like the episode, remember to subscribe, to like, to post it on Facebook or Twitter. You can follow me on Twitter at Dr. Jonty, DRJONTY. But before you do any of those many, many things I've just asked you to do, please enjoy the conversation. I think you're our first sort of screenwriter. So you're a pioneer.
I like pioneering.
I don't want to put any pressure on you, but if this doesn't go well, you'll be the last screenwriter.
Well, that's good. The first shall be the last, and the last shall be the first, right, or whatever.
There you go.
So something said once. So,
why don't you just tell me a bit about your background, John? I mean, we met about a month ago in a very strange place. So I know a little bit about you, but for our listeners, why don't you give us a sort of a little bit of a biography?
Sure. Well, I think I'm a very non-traditional screenwriter, if that means anything. In fact, I studied history at college. I worked as a historical writer and researcher for the New York City Parks Department right out of school, and did a lot of freelance writing work for some really crappy magazines, did a lot of editing work. But really my background is in history and research. When I was younger, I thought I would be a writer of something, writing short fiction or something like that, some delusional ideas. But I sort of back-ended into filmmaking and screenwriting through Tony Stone, who you met, who I went to college with, who is just this sort of like a tornado force of nature in terms of creativity. And we made a film called Severed Ways, which is a very psychedelic, bizarre period piece about two Vikings stranded in North America in the 11th century. And he initially, because I'm also a musician, I've been in bands and toured all over the place since God knows when. And he had called me and initially asked me to do sound on that movie because I'm adept at doing sound recording and things like that. And I showed up, and then he asked me, he's like, well, you're good at history and stuff. And do you think you could translate some of this very scant dialogue into Norse, which is something I have never studied before? So then I found myself doing that. And then suddenly he and I were collaborating on the story. And then the next thing you know, I'm credited, I think I'm credited with the original story or something, but also as an AD on that movie, which is really bizarre because obviously I know what that entails now, but at the time I had no idea that I was doing AD and production work. This was over 20 years ago. So yeah, I backed into it that way. And then we started collaborating pretty actively, writing scripts. He's my main script writing partner, although I do work with a couple other guys. I really enjoy collaborative writing. I've written my own scripts, but I really, we have a very unique situation with Heathen Films where it's a group of guys who've essentially known each other for, by the way, Heathen Films is our a filmmaking company that Tony started and all of us sort of jumped in on. And we're essentially a core of guys and ladies who have known each other for 25 years, 20 plus years. Most of us went to college together, so we share a pretty concise aesthetic. So I think, I am a screenwriter, but I think I have a very unique sort of engagement with screenwriting where I'm not like a journeyman. Perhaps I will be, if these things become more successful. But in the moment, it's really essentially like I feel I'm like a hybrid screenwriter, producer, kind of wearing many hats in this world of film. And so I didn't see myself becoming a filmmaker, although I've been obsessed in one way or another with all types of cinema since I was a kid, sneaking into my living room at night when I was supposed to be in bed and turning the TV on and finding some wacko thing on cable and getting totally blown away by it while my siblings want to watch whatever. I was watching the weirdest stuff I could find. So yeah, I think I'm a very peculiar type of screenwriter, if that makes sense. And I was going to say, in my topics, I haven't written a rom-com. I love comedy, but, we're really, we've been on this path of taking historical narratives and sort of flipping the way period movies work and applying a much more classic sense of cinema to what would be a period film, I think.
So that's bringing in also your sort of background in history.
Correct.
And you said you were a musician. What form was that taking? You were touring, right?
Yes, I was in a really rowdy and raucous rock band for many years with actually one of the guys who's done a lot of work with us at Heathen Films. I play stringed instruments, mainly double bass and electric bass, guitar, but I've been playing an instrument of one sort or another since as long as I can remember. So I thought at one point that would be the direction my life would just stick with, but touring around in a band with a bunch of smelly guys for years on end becomes a drag. So I'm really happy that my life has shifted in this direction.
But you did have like you had quite a lot of success with the music, right?
Yeah, yes, signed on labels, toured all over the States, and yada yada, the whole thing. But success, it's just a very subjective quality. So it didn't translate into massive amounts of money, but we have fans, and it was fun. It's definitely a young man's game, and now that I'm over 40, and it's not the being prancing around on stage, having people throw crap at you is it passes its fun point fairly quickly.
Yeah, I could never deal with people throwing stuff. That never.
Right. So writing a script, when you're just throwing things at the wall and seeing what sticks versus having someone throw a beer ball at you is a lot more engaging.
So when you were sneaking into the living room and watching some films, what was the wacky stuff that you were that first sort of hit you and first sort of made you think, okay, I'm weird. This is weird.
Well, I remember, let's see, maybe my earliest film memory, probably 2001 when I was under 10, and that was on cable, and I think it was cable, and just being totally blown away by it. And when you're like a very stereotypical boy, I loved space and astronauts, so I thought, oh great, this is going to be a space movie. And I think I maybe another early memory of a space movie was like Moonraker or something, like a James Bond. So then I'm like, okay, this to have some sort of quality of that, and then just being immersed in how beautiful it looked and also how strange it looked. And I knew enough to know that, yeah, space is a vacuum, there'd be no sound. And obviously Star Wars and seeing those types of action movies as a kid, and and then being the nerd that's like, well, lasers don't go pew pew in space, there's actually no sound. So suddenly I'm seeing something that is hyper realistic on that end, but then has this very, well, as you know, just really poetic and just absolutely riveting imagery, and that very flat two-dimensional Kubrick storytelling where the characters just represent something that's not necessarily too deep because they don't need to. And just being blown away by it. I remember my brother coming into the room being like, what the fuck is this? It just like, so, being bored and leaving. So yeah, that's one of them. It definitely was. The other thing there was those, and then I used to, in the tri-state area where I grew up, they used to have Shaw Brothers kung fu films on Saturday afternoons, which I really loved because they were so absurd. So I think it was a mix of just really spinning the dial and seeing something and landing on it, and never it's not that I didn't love popcorn action movies, because I would go to those with my family, but I just really, once I saw 2001 and then Dr. Strangelove not too long after that, Psycho, I just really started diving in and seeking out things. Everything was in color. I'd like to find black and white movies just to be a little different. And so I was always the one when I would go over for a sleepover and maybe bring a VHS tape, and someone would be like Igmar Bergman, and they'd kick me out of the room.
Eraserhead? What's that?
I would joke around, but then it would end up, then I'd end up watching something like Killer Clowns from Outer Space with everybody and still enjoying it. But the part of me was always like, oh, my friends don't like this stuff, but I do.
It's funny that you mentioned 2001 being kind of divisive, but in terms of sort of your brother coming in and wandering out. I remember watching that with my family as well, and it being a big Christmas film. Like the first time it was shown on British television was New Year's Day, I think. And the whole family sitting down to watch it, and just one by one, everybody sort of drifting off as you're like, are the monkeys still on?
Yeah, exactly. I remember I think I tried to show maybe my dad, I can't remember, Barry Lyndon once. I'm like, you might like this. It's a historical film. And I remember him just quickly like, check it out, Dad. I mean, it's got Ryan O'Neal in it.
I think it was one of Martin Scorsese's documentaries on cinema. He talks about Barry Lyndon, and he refers to a Japanese sense of time. And ever since then, I've used that as a euphemism for boring. It's not boring. Oh, yeah. It's a Japanese sense of time.
Glacial pace, or the I can make a drinking game out of the amount of times he has to duel, which becomes kind of fun. But anyway, so I definitely gravitated. It would be a mix, and then of course, I'd love if it's a big popcorn movie. When I was a kid, I loved the first Indiana Jones movie just because it felt so much like what I would, or the black and white serials that my mom used to say, like, oh, you should. These were fun when I was a kid. I used to love these serial sort of movies, and this feels a lot like it. So that type of storytelling is great. But yeah.
I wonder if these days that sort of people have access to that, because I remember like Saturday morning they used to show Flash Gordon serials.
Oh yeah,
all the way through the summer on TV, just on normal TV. Like before the in between cartoons, there'd be Tom and Jerry, and then a Flash Gordon serial, and then something else. So you kind of got used to watching very, very old stuff. I just wonder if these days with Netflix and everything, there's the same sort of, I know everything is now available, but I'm wondering if it's everything, but on quite a shallow spread.
I tend to agree with you. It might be on the shallow spread. I mean, I think everything's so atomized, and having that limited I mean, it's not, I'm not breaking a new ground here saying that, but having that limited sort of access and sort of being given like, it's the Saturday morning, whatever movie on Channel 5, and just having to watch it. It would be an Abbott Costello film or the Three Stooges, whatever it was. You were sort of captive to that. And now, I think you really, I meet kids who really like a variety of things, but it's a much more cultivated type of attitude where I think I just sort of, I stumbled upon things that I couldn't type in and search and find myself and then curate myself. They're just given to me, even though like I said, if it was 2001, simply if it didn't appeal to me, I'd turn it off or leave the room. But now I think that ability to just self-curate and makes, I don't know if it's any less, or it's just a different interaction to aesthetics than I think you and I had growing up, obviously.
So you get into making films really with Tony at quite a late stage in your career, yeah. And what's the first screenplay that you collaborate on, like from scratch?
Well, so Severed Ways was very much an improvised movie. We had an outline, and we, right. I could backtrack. Like my approach to storytelling is very much rooted in probably my favorite book, like Don Quixote, or like the idea of like pair drama. Like, you have one very active flat character, and then you have a second character who's sort of doubting the actions of a flat character, and that has a propulsive journey. I like I like the sort of quality of storytelling where you have as if you're reading a picture book and you turn one page and it's just a vast vista, and it's like he traveled forward, and like, that kind of propulsive classic tale. Animus is something that I gravitate to. So when we moved on, that film very much feels like a fable. So when we moved on from that and started collaborating, we had this idea that we were going to do this sort of trilogy of American political history films, very rooted in controversial figures. So the first one that we wrote was about John Brown, and it was massive. I mean, the script is so long, it's ridiculous. But Tony's like, throw everything into it. I think it's like over 200 pages. I mean, we had to like edit it down a lot, but it's got like, it's just unbelievable. And my initial inclination was to make it sort of like a Western and rooted in Brown's life in Kansas, and make it like a very psychedelic, bizarro, biblical Western. But instead, Tony wanted to do this big sweep. So we worked on that for a long time. And then in this sort of American terror trilogy, let's say, because John Brown, much like Ted Kaczynski, was labeled essentially a terrorist, although they didn't really use that word in the 19th century. They used it to a degree, but not like we do now. But this idea of political violence, he was extremely controversial. And throughout, until the 1960s, really, there was no revision on his place in American history. He was just sort of the madman with a beard who kicked off the Civil War. And then with the Civil Rights Movement, he becomes this revised figure, much more like kind of like a prophetic figure, and somewhat modern. So similarly, we were drawn to Ted Kaczynski in this way, not to make him a hero, but to re-examine what it means to be a political criminal, in a way, a terrorist, right? So, and then the third script we wrote was a script about Ted Hampton, but of course that would probably become, there was the recent Ted Hampton movie, but then Fred Hampton, I'm sorry, but then that's something that would have been difficult for us to make as Anglo-American white filmmakers. Understanding that, we would have probably ended up having to collaborate and adapt the script and broaden our team for that, which we should. But it was more about taking these characters that are maligned and trying to expose them in a new light. So we worked on this trilogy, and of the three, Kaczynski was the one that got the attention to be made. And actually, it felt more enigmatic, and not to take anything away from Fred Hampton or John Brown, just the idea of Kaczynski presented himself similar to like historical figures like Johnny Appleseed that you don't think are real in a way, but they end up being true. So it's sort of like in an age of access and information, here's this man who sort of harkens back to the time of legend in a way, like how he lives and acts like a hermetic wizard out in the mountains, conjuring explosives and causing destruction. feels much more legendary than. And Brown sort of is this way, but it was interesting that Kaczynski is sort of a cipher in that way, that some of these other figures aren't so much.
Yeah, I mean, my first experience of the first time I ever heard of Kaczynski is I heard Unabomber, but I think it was like a news report on almost like a genre of threat. Was like, oh, there's a suspected Unabomber in Italy, and it was used as sort of like the word that means somebody who's leaving bomb packages here and there, as a genre of killer, rather than as there's an actual individual who started all this. So I definitely see what you mean by that idea that he's someone who's sort of he's there in the back of everyone's head, but a bit like Rudolph Valentino. It's kind of a surprise. Oh, there actually is a Valentino. I thought that was just a cartoon figure or something.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. I mean, he in the 90s, he was suspected as being a radical environmentalist by the media, and certainly the right wing wanted to portray him as a boogeyman of the left. But in actuality, he's very complex and he's much more akin with a libertarian or a right wing type of political terrorist than he would be with a left. I shouldn't say right wing, but he's much more of a libertarian type of political criminal than he is belonging to the left. So he's sort of there's this constant shift in who he is or what he is. But like you said, the Unabomber or that hoodie with the sunglasses that was the FBI sketch, these things become these memes that and signposts culturally where people could somewhat identify it, but they really don't get or might not know who he is, almost like Q, for QAnon or something, but not quite like this thing where who is this person, or what are they one person, or what is and what's they're a chaos agent.
Yeah, it's interesting you said that about the way he sort of shifts from left to right and he's used as a boogeyman. I always think it's always interesting how Charles Manson has become a sort of boogeyman of the sort of the this is what hippies are like. And everybody seems to forget what a complete fucking racist he was. It's like, I've got a feeling the racism was a lot more to do with, it stands out a lot more than any of that love stuff.
He's trying to, he also, it's strange because, he was such a schizoid, but he was thinking that he was going to be causing a race war where he'd be allied with, where the black people would rise up against white people. But in a way, then he also had a lot of his own innate racism. So it's like this strange thing. I mean, Kaczynski also has a lot of contradictory threads in his writing and his presentation. He could have these really deep and sort of poetic moments where he's absolutely situated in nature and in his surroundings and completely at peace. And then he'll slip into something where he'll say, like, if I want to burn garbage on my own property, screw it. Like he's just, it's really, for him, everything should be about wild nature, wildness, nature, nature has its own energy and takes care of itself. Men are unable to handle it unless they're like him, like strong Ubermensch, like he's very much about, I could survive if you can't, screw you. There's no real positive message to his program, except there's resonance. He's talking about the corrosive natures of technology and industrial society. And I think we could all relate to that. And he's right on those points somewhat. But when he gets into these whole things about his personal mission, it's very much about his internal emotional scars, and also he's like Raskolnikov and Dostoevsky. Like, I have my own inside understanding of morality. Everybody else operates in another way, and their morality is based on all these dumb things like getting up and being like a machine to the industrial society, being chained to these technological things that deny them true freedom and are corrosive and will collapse upon themselves in a massive calamity. And he saw himself in a way saying, like, well, it's better to knock the whole contraption over now through acts of terrorism to bring the collapse now rather than later, because it's going to be that much worse. So, as you sift through his writing, you could sort of piece apart, okay, well, that's totally a psychopath's thinking, and this is a very lucid person thinking. And what I have been, Tony and myself and Gaddy, like what we were really drawn to is that often, when narratives of the mad bomber involve like, ooh, there's a madman out there and he's operating and like he's a bad man, he's a monster, and everything he's doing is monstrous, and crazy people are just crazy. They never have moments of lucidity. Well, I mean, being insane is on a spectrum. Even using the word insane, whatever you want to describe his malady, he could operate very normally. Even if he lived very idiosyncratically, he could still function in a way that someone would say, like, he's a little odd, but he's not anything abnormal in the West, where there are a lot of weirdos living in the woods. So in that way, I think it's pretty, for us in terms of a storytelling operation, it's pretty, we're drawn to trying to show people the human all too human, or what separates me from him, rather than being like, there's a monster and here come the good guys to get the monster and everything's going to be okay. And, I don't know if you saw the Netflix Unabomber series that Kevin Spacey produced, and what's his name? The dude from Avatar. And it's horrible. I mean, people like it, but it's, they filmed it in Georgia. It looks nothing like Montana. It's just basically like, the FBI is trying to get a bad guy. And then, of course, the trope of the FBI agent starts to identify with the bad guy. I'm in too deep, that whole kind of nonsense.
I'm in too deep. Is there a point where he's having a shower and he sort of leans on the shower wall? I mean, the writing that Ted does, the Kaczynski does, and it plays a really prominent part in the movie. And it made me sort of draw parallels with him, which I think he must be drawing himself as well, with sort of Walden and Thoreau and that sort of tradition of American pastoral. When you were preparing the script, when you were collaborating with Tony and Gabby, and did you go through all this writing? How deep did you get into that, and what was that like?
Incredibly deep. We did a lot of initial research in New York, and then I went out to the University of Michigan to the Labadie Special Collection, which is one of the largest collections of radical political ephemera, probably in the world. So if you're interested in anarcho-syndicalist movements, the Black Panthers, whatever, they have a massive amount of posters, paraphernalia, and literature associated with all these movements. So just as a tangent, he went to his graduate, he pursued his graduate degree in a real complex form of mathematics at the University of Michigan, but hated it there. And they just happened to have this collection. So when he was arrested, they solicited him to have whatever material they could get from himself or from the FBI, and to keep it there in their archive. And it turns out that the Kaczynski archive there is one of their most popular accessed archives. So I went out there and I went through about 90 boxes of material over the course of a week to 10 days. I can't remember, but like morning to night, every day, pouring over his writing. A lot of it, his journals have been photocopied by the FBI. Most of them, they auctioned off, and that's a whole other funny story, but a lot of his material is there. So we had accessed books written by authors from the material previously. And then I just went out to really dive in and just find some peculiar arcana. And it was mind blowing. And also there are like 600 pages of notes on how to build bombs. So at the end of that, if the FBI is listening, I think I do know how to build a bomb, but I'm not going to build a bomb, but it's all there. And he wrote a lot of that in Spanish, believe it or not. So that was very odd. So I mean, I just poured through tons and tons of documents out there.
Were there ever times when you were sort of going through that you sort of thought, oh, this is a moment that's definitely going to go in. This is something.
Yeah, absolutely. And also a lot of it too was like, okay, well, we had heard about X, and then you could sort of confirm it in the archive, which was great. And having another curious thing about the archive is he technically he says he manages it from the Supermax in Colorado that he's incarcerated in. And so he'll send in current correspondence that he gets, that he hand copies, and then he makes notes on it, how to be sorted in his archive. So yeah, no, we definitely, I landed upon some stuff that was really great and just had to be in the film, and then so we revised the script through that. So it was just this constant iteration of new material, but we really wanted to be as much as possible in his voice, because obviously in making anything, you say this is a true story. Well, no, yes, but no, it's historical fiction as forensically accurate as you could make it. It's a historical narrative as close to how we perceive Kaczynski's Kaczynski, if that makes any sense. Rather, it's always going to be a bit of us. That's impossible to get away from the POV of the filmmaker and the storyteller. But we really were striving to have that just really brutal accuracy. So you could just be sitting within him in the way that Taxi Driver works when you're with Travis Bickle, or the sort of or the flip of Sheen's character in Apocalypse Now, or Brando, like where you get into the sort of mental state of the character. But in this case, having it be a person who's still alive.
Yeah. Did you have any contact with him, or is that even possible?
It's possible. I thought about writing him. Sholto wrote him, and I hadn't, at that point when he signed on, I hadn't met Sholto yet. I think Tony probably, I know Tony did try to sort of maybe coax him on how to speak to him, but Sholto, being who he is and he's enthusiastic, I think he just wrote his own understanding of him in a very effusive way. And I think Kaczynski's kind of a jerk, as he saw in the film. Yes. I think there's a way in, but I think he's probably would not have, like, if you approach him in that sort of directly enthusiastic and earnest way, I don't know. I think he likes to play with people who are like that. So and I didn't want to really, I don't know. I mean, I didn't write him, and for my own reasons. I mean, because being inside this guy's head for a while really becomes an uncomfortable place. So I preferred a bit of distance. Although now maybe I could see myself maybe writing him, and he'll never see the film. I mean, he'll only read about it, I imagine, because the circumstances of how he's jailed. So yeah, I mean, he has commented on some of the other things that have been made about him by saying, like, I read about the film that was made about me and it sounds like crap, like that sort of thing.
Yeah, he's not good. He doesn't strike me as somebody who would be your perfect critic.
No.
Or even
he's gone back and forth with even acknowledging that he was the Unabomber. Like sometimes he writes about himself and like the Unabomber would, right? He still sometimes has a bit of critical distance from it, but he certainly is not. He doesn't separate himself from the politics of the Unabomber, but sometimes because he was for a long time, he was trying to peel the case, and so it's pretty interesting to read his current thoughts about who the Unabomber is, because he knows that the Unabomber, like I said, now has become like a Johnny Appleseed or a Paul Bunyan, like a type of cipher for this new anti-technology movement that's grown since.
So there's a sense that he wants to sort of claim ownership of it?
To a degree,
right.
For sure. I mean, he sees himself centered in it, I think, but does he have any, I don't think has any moral crisis over the people he killed. And he certainly doesn't have any contact with his brother anymore. And his brother is the person who essentially got him arrested. And they were very close. And he thinks that his brother is a traitor, essentially, to his familial bonds, to the politics of being against things. The brother was a hippie. Kaczynski was not a hippie, much like man. He was very about the farthest you could get from a hippie as possible. He loathed hippies, really, in a way. But he lived in a way that if you were a square person, you'd be like, that guy's a hippie. He lives in a cabin with no electricity and yada, yada, yada. But instead, he's someone obsessed with pure mathematics and never here's another interesting thing about him. In all the writing I've read, he never references anything involving popular culture or film. The only time he ever mentions that he's ever seen a film or TV is at one point he mentions the African Queen when talking about.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy to see if you could save when you bundle your home and auto policies. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
His family. And he says, my family it's like that scene in The African Queen when Bogart is wading through the muck and he's covered in leeches, and my family are those leeches. That's the only reference I've ever saw of him specifically talking about anything popular, because then the only other popular culture reference would be Stephen Foster for music that he likes. So that's, mid 19th century American, way down upon the Swanee River kind of stuff, or, Baroque music. So he's not at all rooted in anything that, he's like an alien in that regard. He has no social, he certainly had a spectrum disorder, because he has nothing that he would ever be able to talk to you or me about in terms of common culture.
Right. There's no common language there.
Right.
Even in terms of him writing his notes in Spanish and even mathematics itself being often regarded as a language to describe reality. It's
exactly
an elitist language in many ways. Well, what about, I know you wrote this film and you released it. It had its premiere at Berlin, which is February, I think. So there's no way that you could have known about the January the 6th insurrection, attempted insurrection. But you must have been watching the news and thinking, there are so many parallels here in terms of what Kaczynski did and that sort of subconscious. Is that what he sort of represents as kind of American id? That he's a sort of, this is where the monsters are living.
I think
not so much that he's a monster, but this is where our nightmares are.
I agree. I think to a degree he is like the American id, and you brought up Thoreau before. In some of the promotional material for the film, at one point, I think I wrote a line like, it's Walden in the afterglow of Hiroshima. Like he's very much, if Trump represents this latent fascism in the American id, I don't see Kaczynski as a fascist. Kaczynski is sort of this perverted American individuality, right? He really wants to be left alone. The January 6th troglodyte fascists, whatever we want to call them, are really trying. They're also a perverted version of this sort of American identity, but it's as if they're truly fascistic. It's a ahistorical understanding of what it means to be an American. They're saying we are inheritors of the 1776. All of you aren't. Trump is our godhead, and we are here to, manifest our understanding of history. So, so in a way, Kaczynski is part of the crisis in America now, right? There's certainly a large degree of Americans who are really distraught about control, technology, and worldwide. But in the American sense, the idea that, okay, I can't earn a decent living, I can't do X, Y, and Z because I'm constantly being monitored by these things that stifle my freedom. And if I could unchain myself from that and liberate myself from that, I would be able to engage or energize some type of individual potential. I'm sympathetic to that. I don't believe in that type of individuality. I think it's kind of a very unfortunate. Certainly, it's an energizing phenomenon in American ingenuity on the positive side, but the negative side is that it sort of abandons the idea of social bonds and community. For the January 6th crowd, I think it's all stemming from this idea that the psychic energy, or if there is a supernatural force to history, and that swings between the positive and the negative, America is now unfortunately in this pendulum swing toward the negative id energy, which is manifested by Trump and this ascendant American fascism, and it's very troubling. I think the younger people who are approaching Kaczynski are more from the leftist perspective. Certainly there are libertarians who would identify with him because he was more of that. But I think there are a lot of young anti-technology, anti-capital activists that see Kaczynski that frame. And because they don't necessarily know a lot about his writings that were hard and he was like, I want to kill a communist. And we have that in the movie. Like he says things like where it's clear he has a lot of contempt for leftists. But since that's not widely known, people then look at the things where he's correct, where he's speaking about control and technology, and they're moving in that direction. So I think it's my anecdotal opinion that some of the younger political activists who are resurrecting the idea of Kaczynski are approaching him from that way. So perhaps they could pull a positive type of political energy out of it and try to come up with some sort of counter to mass corporatization and technological control. But in terms of the negative id forces of January 6th, I think that's something separate from truly the Kaczynski, how to put it, the Kaczynski platform, if there is one.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the big difference as well is that was to some extent a part of a mass movement, a collective action. And Kaczynski's sort of the opposite of that. He's sort of, he's on his own, sending things out into the world.
Right, and that's a good point. And it's weird humor because in some ways, sort of like Dennis the Menace, or like, the neighborhood kid who's like vandalizing shit and causing like, oh, who broke into my house? Oh, that rascally Ted Kaczynski. Part of his sense of humor was to act like he was part of a group. So I think he saw that he called himself "We Are Freedom Club." Well, there was no "we," it was just him. But I think he did that for humor, not to see himself as part of a group, because he just thought that he was superior than most people, although he was really this wounded person who needed love in his life or just human connection. But his intellect and his Apollonian way of approaching the world he could never resolve that problem, that need for human contact.
Yeah, and that's very much where the film's sort of strength lies, is in that ambivalence that you manage to. I mean, it's a really difficult balancing act of not making you empathize with him, but at the same time also making you very aware of how horrific his own sort of psychic existence is, and the actions that come therefrom.
Yeah, and that was central in all our minds, but I definitely was. It's easy to make, when you're so often in these films, these characters become too heroic. It's a way to, or if it's like Falling Down or something, or a film where you kind of really see this kind of character who's repulsive, but they become like an action movie star, or The Joker, which I didn't like. It was, parts of it look cool, but that idealizing of that type of like terrible, they're terrible people, right? And I thought the Joker was flat and stupid in that way, and the portrayal of, I think Joaquin Phoenix is an amazing actor, but I think Todd Phillips should maybe stick to other types of storytelling. And because I don't think, the goal is to, like I said, human all to human for me to explain these types of characters. It's not to sort of say like, oh yeah, like the terrible American energy that is what that Todd Phillips Joker character is, which is just like a vicious nihilist who is out to kill and to glorify that. It's in so much American cinema, you get these, they're not even anti-heroes. They just make that type of violence and swagger heroic. And to me, I find that idiotic and juvenile. And, even if it makes for an entertaining film, it's really unfortunate. And I don't think doesn't do it. Given that's fiction, it's pretty problematic to me.
I was having a conversation with Patrick McGillian. Actually, it'd probably be the episode that goes out just before this one. And we were talking about Dirty Harry in very much those terms. I love Dirty Harry, and I actually have a lot of time for the Joker. But I totally see your point, and I totally saw Patrick's point in terms of this is a real, him shooting the guys while eating a hot dog is just expression of this simplistic, we've got a problem, and here's a guy who just shoots people, and that solves the problem. And it's that sort of simplicity, that is, as you say, problematic.
Yeah, I'm not against, like, Dirty Harry. I liked when I was a kid, but I see it now a little differently. Like, I'm not against that type of storytelling, or someone shouldn't tell that story. I just think it has to be, the balancing act is quite hard. So, like, I think the way that Phillips went to make Phoenix's character sympathetic is just not deep. So therefore, it just becomes he might not have. Maybe he thought he was doing something that was a little more ambivalent and a little more complex. But you just don't. But Scorsese, with Travis Bickle, you get Schrader gets like to the core of Bickle, and he doesn't I mean, he has that weird sort of violent redemption at the end where he's trying to save Jodie Foster's dignity in some really, like, again, almost like there's the Don Quixote going for Dulcinea, but it's an insane quest. You know, I mean, there's more ambivalence to Bickle, you know, than the Joker character. And to me, I feel like Phillips was going for like that sort of Schrader. Yeah, I'm going to show some gritty, tough, you know, everybody keeps kicking this guy and look what's going to happen. This is what happens when you keep kicking white guys. You know, it's like, it's very, to me, that's obviously has a lot of, it's a pretty loaded phenomenon right now.
Yeah, it's definitely, you know, Scorsese, but in crayon. I mean, again, I haven't got a problem with Scorsese in crayon, to tell you the truth, but I do.
Well, yeah, if we're gonna get it, you know, we might as well anyway. We can.
I do get what I found strange about the reaction to Joker and the reaction to. I saw Joker at Venice when it was premiered, and so nobody had seen it, and I came out thinking, "Wow, I was totally not expecting that." I was very, very down on the whole idea of the film. So I came out very enthusiastic and I enjoyed it. And I remember talking to people, and I talked to a guy, Robbie Collins, who writes for The Telegraph, and he was saying, oh, this is a really dangerous movie. This is really, really dangerous. It should be sort of buried in the middle of the sea. And he was like, I liked it, but it's a really dangerous film. And I was thinking, really? Is it? And I was so naive because the backlash and the backlash and the front lash and all the rest of it very much supported Robbie's contention that this was going to be a very controversial film. And I was just thinking, I just thought it was a better than usual comic book movie, you know?
I mean, I think what you just said, better than usual comic book movie, is correct. And I should probably be fair and give it another watch. But I do think to the degree that it feels dangerous is because something I was maybe inarticulate about before, like the psychic energy, the historical energy now feels very much driven to that that type of fascism and that type of just violent white male energy in this. And whether or not it should be buried at the bottom of the sea, I don't know. But what it's reflecting it's reflecting forces that are maybe that Phillips wasn't aware of. But, you know, knowing that he made Hated, which I really liked when I was younger, the G.G. Allen documentary.
Yeah, it's an excellent documentary. Well worth digging up. I think it might even be on YouTube. I think you might be able to get it, watch it for free.
Yeah, for a long time it was impossible to find. But I remember, you know, just because, I mean, being a tri-state area person living in New York for a long time, I mean, G.G. Allen has all of these kind of seeming comic, but now actually like a little uncomfortable. But the fact that he was sort of into the G.G. Allen phenomenon early, and then you could sort of see this thread. There's a little echo of that in who the Joker is.
So just for our listeners, G.G. Allen was a sort of punk performer who would go to great extremes on stage, of a little bit like Iggy Pop, but doing things like, I don't know, having more violent, yeah, having shits and such, and
literally.
Yeah, literally, yeah, exactly, yeah. So you can see where he got the idea for The Hangover as well.
Yeah. So, like, you know, there's things about his filmmaking that I enjoy, but I just felt, I think, and also it could be very American, you know, knowing that this is an American energy of violence. And of course, we've been great exporters of violence to the world culturally, but this now really, you know, I grew up in Newtown, Connecticut, where the school shooting happened, where you massacred with it. 26-year-olds were massacred in school, and knowing that, you know, on a personal level, just that this is just an all too common occurrence in America, and seeing more and more of types of entertainment that speak to that id, that type of American id, especially in this climate, feels dangerous.
Yeah, it's kind of difficult, isn't it? Because I was thinking about how the sort of MAGA movement and the far right have appropriated and taken so many things from popular culture, which, like, so the idea of I saw The Matrix Resurrections last night, and the idea of red pilling has become a big meme in right-wing circles. Fight Club, which is written by a sort of leftish gay guy, has been taken by the right as a sort of, you know, the snowflakes, the word comes from Fight Club. that use of it. So it's kind of like, I don't know, they'll get anything, and there's such a level of postmodern irony in that, which we always thought was the province of the left, was this sense of humor, but it's totally been taken over by the right, I think.
Yeah, it's so fascinating because here, forever on the right, I was an avid listener to right-wing radio just because I found it somewhat entertaining, but also just to know what the other side is thinking. For years, Rush Limbaugh would constantly say, relativism, the historical relativist on the left, and they're always trying to relativize X, Y, and Z. Well, they've become the biggest relativists of all, and they've adopted this postmodern irony, as you described, and it's insane and so bizarre. And similarly here, like in America, we have the three percenters, the Oath Keepers, and a lot of these guys use Molon Labe, which is like from is that Herodotus? It's basically, they've adopted a lot of the culture of Sparta, the understanding of the Battle of Thermopylae, not from reading Herodotus or Thucydides, but from fucking the 300. So they see themselves. So it's this whole comic appropriation of like what they think was classical culture, which actually, to a degree, informed some parts of the Republican and experiment in the 18th century, but they're coming through it through comic books and a totally perverted, it's just this postmodern trickle down, the lowest common denominator appropriation of something that they have no idea about. So like the fascist culture that's developing in America is so trashy. And I know when I read about the 1930s and people say, oh, Hitler and the Nazis were so trashy and coarse, but to some degree, at least they're sitting around like mining, like, okay, there's this ancient Aryan culture, and if that was dumb, and if that's like here, then the American stupidity fascist cultural mind is like, way, 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 way below the Nazi mean. It's in some like gutter trash of like American fast food culture and just shit. And so in a way, Hugo Boss designed Nazi uniforms. American fascism's coming in like sweatpants and like a baseball cap and some stupid shirt that says like Molon Labe and 300 quote on it. And it's awful. I hate to be classist.
I think the one thing about the situation is that you can't go too far in criticizing it. It's pretty foul. So you said you worked with Tony on this trilogy, and is that an ongoing project then? Is that something you would like to sort of, or is that just how you got to Ted K?
We would love to be able to do the John Brown film. Obviously, with the success of the Ethan Hawke, I don't know if you saw that. That was really great. The little bird, something
bird.
Yes, it was great, and I went into it with like no expectations and really enjoyed it. I think he's an essential figure, and I think a good John Brown film would be great. Quentin Tarantino keeps talking about wanting to do a John Brown film. At one point, they were going to develop something for HBO. There was going to be a series about John Brown. I don't know. Maybe we'll try that.
The Good Lord Bird. The Good Lord Bird.
That's it. Right. And people should see that if they haven't. I really enjoyed it. I would like to approach that. I've been thinking, I've been kicking around a couple ideas still in the history zone. We have sort of inspired by, from personally, I was thinking that I have an idea involving American, like a noir set in actually just at the end of World War II, but it would involve American GIs who've gone AWOL and are running criminal gangs in Europe, which they did. And it's a sort of and having a detective and a military detective have to track these gangs down, because that was a phenomenon that happened. Americans always are so obsessed with the good war that they don't realize that like tens of thousands of GIs went AWOL and murdered people in Europe and ran gangs. And
oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's like the real third man feel to it as well.
Yeah.
The immediate aftermath of the Second World War. That's a brilliant idea. I'd love to hear more about that.
Someone's going to steal on your podcast, but if you steal it, just acknowledge me.
Yeah. No, I love the sort of situation there, and also that idea of, as you say, of sort of complicating a period of history which has been a little bit sort of Stephen Ambrosed and Steven Spielberg with Saving Private Ryan and Band of Brothers. Yeah, I mean, all great, but at the same time,
well, you have to tell. I understand the utility of common stories in history, right? I think the problem is that there's ultimate truth. Truth is aspirational, but there are many types of, it's that Rashomon, there's many types of ways to get to what the truth is. And we have to have a functioning society and a civic culture. We have to have aspirational truths. We just can't sort of get dogmatic about them. We have to accept that they evolve, and the input and the points of view will shift with with how we feel culturally at any time. And it's that pendulum swing. Like now we're swinging very hard into this violent perversion of what this sort of aspirational truth is, and then hopefully, like, the pendulum swings back to this place where we can start navigating toward something that's more civic and less destructive.
Yeah, and that different form of truth. Thinking about John Brown as well, I remember watching The Good Lord Bird after seeing Michael Curtiz's The Santa Fe Trail, which tells the same story, but from and is really, I'm not sure how well known the film is, but given that he made it a couple of years after Casablanca, it's such a horrifically fascistic film. I mean, that's a really horrible. I mean, it's birth of the nation bad in its politics.
Oh yeah, I mean, just to have a digression of Brown real quick, if you don't mind. Like Brown, he's sort of for your audience. He's living in the just up to the Civil War, and he's from New England, and New England has shifted from puritanical Calvinism into congregationalism, and sort of the religious culture of New England shifted. But John Brown, in the words of Thoreau and people who knew him, they're like, oh, he's like our great grandfathers. I mean, he's still living in this deeply Calvinistic mindset of like predestination, and that, sinners in the hands of an angry God, that we're all doomed. And the only thing you could do is sort of act piously and protect, and do the righteous thing, which is to stand up for everyone and do God's will. But you're probably doomed and you're going to go to hell anyways. So, but you have to act for the good. So that he is this, in a way, he's like a leftist. It's like centering religion in the left, which is so kicked out right now. Like, everybody's so committedly secular that the idea that you could be religious and have a good point of view is ludicrous to a lot of people. Not to me, but like a lot of people sort of see that as like a ludicrous point of view, and they leave the religion to be something of like kooky right. But there are plenty of progressive thinkers and who are inspired by the idea of God and Christ. And in this way, I mean, Brown was this messy figure, but he's sort of operating that, like, look, slavery in an era when the abolitionist movement is anti-slavery, a lot of abolitionists still thought Black people were nothing more than a little steps above monkeys. They just felt that it was immoral to enslave a human, but they didn't think that they were equal to a Black person. But John Brown believed in radical equality. He believed that he was as equal to a Black person as a Black person was to him, intellectually, physically, emotionally. He believed that women should have the right to vote, that that there was no such thing as women's work, that women and men could work. So he had all these amazingly modern ideas, yet he has this great biblical beard, and he sets out to, avenge the sin of slavery by murdering people he saw as slave supporters with swords because he felt, I mean, that's so he has this wildly complex approach. I think it was very hard historically to deal with him, because once the Civil War begins, he's executed in 1859 for the raid on Harper's Ferry. His last words are, the sins of this land shall not be avenged but by blood, or something like that. So he says, like, well, there's nothing we could do now except ride the wave of bloodshed that's coming for how terrible we've been to the bond for enslaving African Americans. And by the 1864-65, Lincoln has gone from sounding like, look, I'll do anything he was anti-slavery, but he'd say, I'll do anything to preserve the Union, including allowing slavery or not, whatever it is, to making a speech in 1864 where he sounds like John Brown. right? In the second inaugural, it's a John Brown speech. But what happens with the second, what happens after second inaugural, after Lincoln's assassination, is the failure of Reconstruction, which is really the second American Revolution in a way, right? Super radical. And it's ironic that the Republican Party of that period was the most radical, positively radical political party. You have all these great experiments where you have the first African-American senators are elected, the first congressmen who are Black are elected, right? That doesn't happen again for another 100 years. But once Reconstruction collapses, the idea of John Brown changes. So first, John Brown is seen as a hero to a large degree to the radical movement in America. And then he has to be demonized now that the South has sort of been redeemed with the collapse of Reconstruction. And that we have this Jim Crow, this slavery by another name arises again. Brown becomes the kooky weirdo that you see in Santa Fe Trail and the maniac and this sort of bloodthirsty loser weirdo. And really, and he's constantly portrayed that in popular culture and paintings and song. And until you get to the 1960s and then get someone like Malcolm X saying like John Brown is the only white man I could be down with, and you get resurrection of Brown in this sort of recentering of him, let's say, or centering of him.
I can't wait to see what you do next, whether it's this noir or resurrected John Brown. I think there's so much scope, so many things that are interesting there. One last question though before I leave you, John, which is because we always ask, usually we're talking about film books, but I'm sure you've read some film books. So could you recommend one for our listeners?
Well, I've been thinking a lot about it. I was thinking that the Elia Kazan A Life is kind of a fascinating film book, and it sort of speaks to a lot of my. I know this wasn't maybe like your usual podcast in terms of like approach to film and writing, but since we've been talking so much about culture and history, he's, as you know, and your audience hopefully knows, just a really important American filmmaker. He's a Ottoman Turkish, he's a refugee from Turkey, or an immigrant from Turkey, arrives in the United States. So he has this very different point of view to begin with, in terms of his approach to being an American, and then famously is a leftist, a communist, and then is essentially sells out other communists in Hollywood during the awful McCarthy era. People are blacklisted, and so he makes these massively important films. And he has such an incredible way, and also he's in theater, so he's kind of does, he crosses genres. But his creative energy and his cinema POV is then clouded, and his reputation is sort of shot. So people want to say, "Oh, screw him," or they kick him to a side, and I think he had to struggle with that, obviously, for the rest of his life. But I think he's, given what we've been talking about, these sort of complex people, I felt that might be a good book if people haven't read it. It's not directly about the craft of making film, specifically saying, like the way that Bresson writes about film, but it's just an amazing biography of an important filmmaker who is controversial. Yeah, it's called Elia Kazan, A Life.
By Richard, it's a Richard Schickel one.
Yes, yeah.
Any of those filmmakers who are coming in the, from the 40s, 50s on, they're a little bit like we were talking about at the very beginning of our conversation. Everybody's got a different point of entry. Everybody is coming from a different road, and some are theater, some are TV, some have never directed anything and they just go straight into directing films. Some come from radio, like Orson Welles. So I think it's fascinating to see these people coming from different directions.
Yep. John,
thank you so much. I think, to tell you the truth, I think we did very well. I think I think I might have another screenwriter on at some point in the future. You haven't poisoned the well. Well done.
Well, you're great, man. And I got a folder of stuff to send you from Saudi Arabia, but let's keep in touch. And it was really great meeting you, and this was great to do this with you. So.
So that was my conversation with John. I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly did. He's a smart cookie. He's a very intelligent guy, very interesting to talk to, and I can't wait to see what he comes up with next. Really fascinating. His recommended book was The Life of Elia Kazan by Richard Schickel. So that's a biography which I've read a few years ago, which is what I would also add my voice to. Controversial but fascinating and certainly hugely influential figure, director of such hits as On the Waterfront and Viva Zapata. All that I have left to do really is thank Elliot Atkins for the music, Ali Howard for the art, and all of you for listening. Until next week, please take care.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy to see if you could save when you bundle your home and auto policies. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
Welcome back to Two Judgy Girls. I'm Mary from the Bay.
And I'm Courtney from LA. TJG is the podcast where we spill all the tea on your favorite reality TV shows, celebrity gossip, and everything in between. We're here to bring you our unfiltered opinions, hilarious commentary, and plenty of laughs along the way.
We're two SDSU Delta Gamma sisters with a microphone and a whole lot of opinions. Each week, we dive headfirst into the wild world of reality television, from Bravo to all the trash TV you could want. We break down the drama, dissect the latest scandals, and share our thoughts on everything from the jaw-dropping moments to the embarrassing antics.
But that's not all. We're not here to just gossip. We're here to connect with you, the jurors, and share our love of all things pop culture. Whether we're dishing on the latest celebrity breakups, discussing our favorite guilty pleasure movies, or sharing embarrassing stories from our own lives, we promise to keep it real, keep it fun, and keep you coming back for more.
Come judge with us.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.